Hello and welcome again to another episode of Confessions of an RPG Maker User. Today we'll be discussing my flawed masterpiece, Tales of Yore. Now, Tales of Yore was my first commercial project that I made for Game Jolt back a few years ago. I think 2018, and I made this during my time at Devro, and Devro is basically a special needs facility in Rutland, Massachusetts that is undergoing some problems with its corporate in Pennsylvania, but that's neither here or there. Tales of Yore was sort of this game that I made because at Devro in school we played this educational game called Prodigy Math Game, and it was this role-playing game where you solved math problems to fight enemies, and I sort of disliked the way it was. The game pushed a lot of membership stuff. There's a paid membership that you have to pay for to get the best equipment, so everything was behind a paywall. I feel like it was made not only to educate kids but also to profit off of kids, which I feel like is pretty scummy. So that inspired me because it was one of the few times in my career with RPG Maker where I was like, hey, I can do this better in RPG Maker. The first time I had this sort of idea was when I made Dungeontopia on my Game Jolt page. Link is in the description, and if you're watching this off the RPG Maker web forums, I will leave a link to my Game Jolt page so you can see it there. And Dungeontopia I made because there was this educational program that we used in Accept, another program somewhere in Natick, and that one had a special video game about, life skills management. So I figured, hey, I can do this in RPG Maker, which I did. So anyway, I made Tales of Yore because I figured, hey, I can make a cool math game using RPG Maker, because I feel like you can do a lot in RPG Maker and you can get a lot of mileage out of it despite, the chibi art style. And so I made Tales of Yore. And the reason I call it a flawed masterpiece is because of the way side quests are programmed. Now, I use the game's quest system to essentially mass produce 67 side quests, which for an indie game, that is an absurd amount. And for a game developed with no budget, with default RTP assets, meaning all the enemy graphics that are in that game are the enemy graphics that come with MV. All the music used either came from other sources or was the default music in RPG Maker MV. And this proved that, yeah, you can make a commercial game with a lot of effort and time put into it, whilst at the same time, using only default stuff, because I'm not an artist, nor am I a musician. But what I am is a decent writer, and I wrote these 4 stories for it. The first season of Tales of Yore is about this features a parody of the Forest Fairy from Prodigy, who, gets mad that her game is being outdone by Tales of Yore and tries to destroy the game. The second one is Cinderella, except the evil stepmother is replaced by Margaret Thatcher, and you fight her cabinet ministers, and then with her as the final boss. The third season is a parody of Pokemon, in which the Forest Fairy returns as a rival. And then the fourth plot is a parody of Mother, or Earthbound Beginnings, if you're American. And by the way, fun fact about the Mother parody, or Bother as it's called. The composition for the 8 melodies is the same as the 8 melodies in the original Mother game, but because I acapella'd the track myself, and because the melody is cut into bits for when you collect the 8 individual melodies, because of how garbled it is when it's cut into sections and so unrecognizable unless you listen to the entire thing, you can't even tell it's the original 8 melodies. It's just that badly garbled, which is proof of why I'm not a musician, but a writer. Gigu is replaced by this guy with an alien JFK, whose name is a combination of John Fitzgerald Kennedy and with Gygus's 3 names tacked onto it. So it's Kennegue. So I think it's Johnague, Fitzgerald Gas, Kennegeeg. So, yeah. Anyway, going back to how side quests were programmed. So this is before I discovered that you can make simple fetch quests using only 3 switches and a common event. Now, for those who don't know RPG Maker, a common event is a special kind of event program that you make in the engine that, if it needs to be triggered as many times as possible, or is an event that's triggered very often, you can just simply make one of these things called a common event and just have it be triggered by going into the event programming and having it select a common event. And once that common event it triggers the event programming done in the common event. So, yeah, I probably poorly explained it, but that's essentially how it was. And Tales of Yore, what I did instead is that everything is done as all the fetch quests are rendered as a parallel event. And that meant for every dungeon, for every place where enemy drops could be obtained, I had to essentially copy and paste almost a shit ton of these parallel events, which, probably isn't great for performance. Whenever I tested Tales of Yore on the computers at Devro, because there is a HTML distribution of it that you can play in a browser, it ran like shit. So that didn't work. I then learned shortly after the game's release that you could do these things using common events, and if something goes wrong, you can, at least go and edit the common event. And because it's a common event that runs parallel so long a certain switch is activated, I don't have to copy and paste hundreds, like 100 of different events. So that was neat. Another problem was that the game was very buggy, and that's because at Devro, your time allotted for media, which is, video games and computer use, is limited to 80 minutes. That is, if you earned all your points that day. So I had 80 minutes per day to work on the game, twice that amount if it's a weekend or a vacation day. And because I had such limited time, I had to put all my effort into adding content and not play testing. So when I tested the game out fully, I realized that there's this ice puzzle, this ice dungeon, this sliding ice puzzle in a dungeon that could potentially soft lock your game if you're not careful enough. And so I had to fix that, almost redoing the entire ice puzzle thing and adding a return area, so that way midway through the dungeon you can return to the front entrance. So, yeah, it was very buggy, and one of the updates that I had was strictly bug fixes, and it was a shit ton of fixes I had to do. In fact, there's probably to this day some sort of bug that I haven't encountered because I haven't been bothered to play the game to the extent where you need to essentially need to break the game or something like that. So the reason Tales of Yore has 67 side quests is that I'm obsessed with the idea that there's efficiency in the pricing of indie games relative to the amount of content that they have in there. And I would compare Tales of Yore to Undertale. Undertale is available for $15, and you can beat it in like 4 hours. Tales of Yore is $20, so it's $5 more than Undertale, and at minimum, it will take you 8.5 hours or 8 minutes, or it would take either 8.5 or 8 hours, 40 minutes to beat the entire game with minimal attention focused on the side quests with minimal grinding. So if you include grinding, completing all 67 side quests, and participating in the little Devro Tycoon mini game that I included once you beat all the National Association for the Advancement of Yokai People side quests, or the NAAYP if you're into making Toho themed Johnny Rebel parodies, once you complete those side quests, you unlock this sort of Devro Foundation simulator where you can just create enemy drops by having essentially Devro students and Devro clients working in mines and factories and putting them to work. So, yeah. So if you include all that, it is easily more than double that. So 8.5 hours. So 8 plus 8, that's 16. Half plus half, that's 1. So that's about 17. That's 17 plus-ish hours, which is amazing considering that this is an indie game selling for $20. Now, if Toby Fox were to make a game that is up to his usual musical and graphical quality that could match Tales of Yore in the quantity of content, because the thing about Toby Fox games is that they're rather short. So, yeah, that'll be the day. And yes, I am saying that Tales of Yore is better than Undertale in the quantity of content department, but, because I am not a musician nor a graphic artist, that's where I can concede defeat to Toby Fox and his autistic horde of Undertale fans, who are inexplicably also obsessed with Doki Doki Literature Club and Five Nights at Freddy's. Oh yeah, Five Nights at Freddy's. Hey, Scott Cawthorn. Night Trapped called. They want their Sega CD game back. So, yeah. Hee Shimon. So yeah, Tales of Yore will always be in my heart as my first large commercial project, the first game that I made for a price, the first game that I spent literal months and months and months, I think about like 7 months for the entire game to be developed, and I love it with my heart, but at the same time, it's got problems due to my lack of experience making side quests and programming things in general. Ever since then, I've sort of focused on quality of content and the quality of the gameplay experience over the absolute quantity of content, because the problems with quantity is that the bigger your game, the more you have to play test it. And due to having only 80 minutes per day at Devro to work on your game, it is a recipe for disaster. And luckily, disaster hasn't come because I made a big enough effort to play test it, to do bug fixes. I think one update had like 20 bug fixes, and it's bug fixes and changes in the change log. So yeah, this concludes episode 3. Please leave a like and subscribe, and I'll see you next time.